Ancient Autumn wasn't discouraged. Finding the Son of Destiny wasn't something that could be done in a day, and it wasn't the first time she'd come up empty-handed. Her lady sister had only given her a vague lead. Wang Donger would likely cross paths with that Son of Destiny, but she hadn't said how or when. Ancient Autumn had to figure that out herself. Now, however, she frowned. She could have been imagining it, but the faint, destiny-laced scent she detected on Wang Donger seemed stronger than before. Chamber of Commerce? Kong Family Chamber of Commerce, she murmured, committing Wang Donger's words to memory. If the Kong family provided no further clues, perhaps she should start investigating the Chamber of Commerce. She touched the silver dragon scale her lady sister had given her. Confidence surged. With her lady sister's dragon scale protecting her, even if something went wrong, her lady sister would intervene. No one could bypass her lady sister's protections and capture or suppress her. Could they? Impossible. Bolstered by that thought, Ancient Autumn resolved that if the Kong family yielded nothing, she'd go straight to the Chamber of Commerce. She had the advantage. Not long after dealing with Tang San's god test, Kong Ming'an received a message and left the Chamber of Commerce. After a brief preparation, he headed straight to the extreme north land. Spatial ripples spread quietly through the core of that frozen realm as he stepped out. To his mild surprise, the place before him had changed. There was no biting, knife-like wind. Instead, a body-searing, bone-deep cold pressed down. Beneath his feet stretched an endless ice plain, riddled with countless ice crystal flowers of every shape, each emitting a faint glow. Beautiful, but deadly. The low temperature here would freeze an ordinary spirit saint solid in an instant. A spirit Duluo could survive only a short while. Only a true Duluo could stand more than a moment. This was the absolute forbidden land of the extreme north. Before Kong Ming'an could take in his surroundings, his human aura disturbed the place like a stone flung into a still lake. Terrifying auras snapped toward him. Figures flickered, and 5 warriors descended with a roar, each radiating monstrous power. Spirit rings glowed into being. Their lowest configuration was 8 black and 1 red, an ultra-standard setup. Spirit phantoms like ice bears and cyclopes materialized behind them, their presence terrifying. They were ready to suppress this intruder who had dared appear in the core forbidden land during a heightened security period. Spirit power, like a storm, surged toward Kong Ming'an. At that moment, a petite figure in white and green flashed into being before him as if by teleportation. "Stop!" she cried, her voice filled with sovereign authority and anger. Emerald spirit power shot up from her, and the aura of extreme ice rolled outward unchecked. The attackers immediately halted, their powers retracting. One of them, a round-faced, simple-looking young man with a giant white bear phantom, blinked, scratched his head, and asked in bafflement, "Auntie, he's a human, right? Didn't you say that during this period no one, especially humans, may enter the core? If we see one, we suppress them immediately, no questions asked?" The Ice Empress blocking Kong Ming'an paused and pressed her lips together. "He's different from other humans," she said firmly. "Is that so?" Xiaobai nodded slowly, looking between the unperturbed Kong Ming'an and the Ice Empress protectively standing in front of him. Then, as a dawning thought formed, he began to ask, "Auntie, is he the one you?" He didn't finish. A razor-thin ice blade, radiating lethal cold, materialized and hovered inches from his nose. Xiaobai fell silent, immediately shifting into his more durable spirit beast form, a huge, round, fluffy white bear. He pulled his head and limbs in, curling into a giant snow-white ball, trembling and too intimidated to make a sound. The Ice Empress snorted, dispelled the ice blade, and shot a look at the other 100,000-year soul beasts. They returned her gaze with surprise and uncertainty. Putting her hands on her hips, she turned to Kong Ming'an and said urgently, "You, prove it, switch forms." "Eh?" Kong Ming'an blinked. The Ice Empress's tone rose with impatience. "Your elementalization, the extreme ice one." Understanding flashed through Kong Ming'an's face. With a thought, he entered elementalization. A vast, pure aura of extreme ice spread from him, as if drawn from the origin of cold itself. At the same time, 5 impossible spirit rings appeared beneath his feet, their aura unlike that of any spirit king. Xiaobai, still curled into a ball, cracked open one eye and felt the aura. It was almost identical to his mother's. He connected the dots. This person might be the special human his aunt and mother always talked about. A huge idea formed in his simple mind. Could this be father? It wasn't just Xiao Bai. All the 100,000-year soul beasts present grew stunned as they sensed the extreme ice aura. It clearly shared the same origin as their emperors, and their eyes went a little dazed. Since their emperor had introduced miraculous shapeshifting and strange cultivation methods, many elder spirit beasts in the extreme north had begun to cultivate similarly. This human might not be a mere human. Perhaps he was one of them, or even their legendary Empress reborn. Sensing their curiosity and respect edge toward acceptance, the Ice Empress smiled faintly. I told you, he's different from other humans. The spirit beasts exchanged glances and, with a mixture of confusion and awe, nodded in tacit agreement. Without another word, the Ice Empress grabbed Kong Ming'an's wrist. Together, they transformed into a jade-green stream of light and swept away from the core, leaving the frozen plain and its watchers behind. The emerald spirit power wrapped around them as they flew, and Snow Empress didn't stop until she was sure there were no other spirit beasts nearby. Only then did she ease her power and let go of Kong Ming'an's hand. She hesitated, turned her face away, and tried to sound calm, though a trace of awkwardness lingered in her voice. Long time no see. Kong Ming'an returned her look with a slight smile. Long time no see. His eyes swept over her, noting the arrangement of spirit rings, 7 blood red and 2 ice blue. Those 2 ice blue star rings, with their flowing ice vortex nebulae, made it clear she hadn't been idle. Her progress was impressive. Snow Empress waited, expecting more, but he only smiled and stared. She frowned, a flash of displeasure in her golden eyes. Don't you have anything else to say to me? She asked. Kong Ming'an blinked at her half-expectant, half-aloof demeanor, then suddenly remembered something, as if struck by an afterthought. Oh, right. Where is the Snow Empress? I have something to discuss with her. Snow Empress went quiet. Almost immediately, her aura shivered and the air chilled. With a hiss and a flash of teeth, she bristled, ready to pounce. Kong Ming'an. Before she could finish his retort, something soft and sweet was shoved into her mouth. She bit down reflexively. Sweet. She chewed again, surprised at the pleasant taste, then swallowed. For a moment, she stood stunned, expression blank. Like a hissing cat suddenly offered a treat, cursed by conflicting instincts of threat and enjoyment. Kong Ming'an's eyes were composed as he took her hand again and slipped an exquisitely crafted spirit tool storage ring onto her slender finger. These are pastries and snacks I had people collect before I came, he said casually. All chosen to match your favorite flavors. Enough to last you months. They're sealed with spirit tool tech. Treats for you. Snow Empress stared at the ring, still warm from his palm, then glimpsed inside. A neat mound of pastries, a special compartment of melon seeds, even little packaged sweets. She silently drew her hand back and turned her face aside, voice a faint buzz. I'll forgive you for now. Thank you, he answered. Humph. She snorted softly, her tone prickly again. Let's go. I'll take you to see the Snow Empress. She led the way, though she couldn't resist taking a small, snowflake-shaped cream cake from the ring and nibbling it. The cream melted on her tongue, cool and perfectly sweet, and she narrowed her eyes in pleasure. Not bad. I like it a lot. Guided by her, Kong Ming'an reached the slope of a magnificent snowy mountain. A cave mouth, half hidden by ice and snow, opened before them. They walked in and followed a naturally formed ice tunnel downward. The temperature dropped until even the breath seemed ready to freeze. Then they emerged into a vast cavern lit from within. The dome and walls were studded with self-luminous ice crystals, bathing the chamber in a daylight-cool glow. In the center, on a giant slab of 10,000-year profound ice, sat a figure of unrivaled purity. Her hair was snow-white, falling to her waist like frozen rivers. Her ice-blue eyes were cold and clear, carrying a chill that pierced the bone. She wore a simple white dress. Her presence felt as if she had been forged from the surrounding cold itself. 3 blood-red and 6 ice-blue spirit rings floated around her, their ice vortex nebulae turning in silence, radiating awe-inspiring majesty. But one of the ice-blue rings looked slightly hollow inside, lacking a spirit core. Sensing them, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes flicked briefly over the woman who had brought Kong Ming'an, then fixed on him. You've come, she said, voice clear and cold with the faintest warmth beneath it. Kong Ming'an stepped forward without bothering with formalities, offering his hand. "It concerns you. I couldn't not come." She accepted his hand and used his help to rise from her meditation cushion. But instead of letting go when she stood, she stepped closer, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pressed her cheek to the back of it. Her lips hovered near his skin as if drinking in its warmth. Then she relaxed, eyes closed. For a moment, she seemed to be drawing comfort from him. Then her eyes twitched as if sensing something, narrowing slightly. The companion who had led them watched the intimate display in stunned silence. "No, she's still here. You two aren't even being discreet, are you? According to your previous arrangements, I have not yet attempted to condense the sixth spirit core myself," Kong Ming'an said in the woman's ear, his voice steady as he spoke the business at hand. "I've only been shaping and stabilizing the spirit rings." The arms around his neck tightened a fraction. He lowered his eyes, feeling the chill of her skin against him, and a strange warmth stirred in his chest. Somehow, she seemed clingier than before. Was that possible? Unsure, he placed one hand on her waist for support and took her free hand in his other. "Then leave the rest to me," he said softly. Her eyes closed again. As if marking him, she rubbed her nose against his neck and let her lips brush his earlobe. She murmured, faint but clear. The woman who had accompanied them stayed to the side, unmoving. It wasn't that she didn't have thoughts on the matter. She simply didn't know what to say or who to scold. How could she possibly insert herself between them now? The sight made her feel utterly redundant, like an oversized spirit tool lamp running at full blast, glaringly bright and completely unnecessary. 163. Hyote. "I was just watching you guys do your job." After a long moment, the Snow Empress slowly released her embrace but remained close to Kong Ming'an. The distance between them was intimate, just like when she once served as Ming'an's protector, the only real difference now being that their hands were tightly clasped. Standing nearby, the Ice Empress took several deep breaths, forcing down the emotions that surged within her chest. She turned her gaze away and spoke as calmly as she could. "I will be your protector shortly." She felt utterly uncomfortable, 10,000 times so, but business was business, and priorities mattered. Still, standing guard while they did business? What was that supposed to mean? The more she thought about it, the more irritable she became. One cheek puffed out in a huff, and her dissatisfaction radiated from her like low pressure. Kong Ming'an paused, glancing at the Ice Empress with her displeasure written all over her face. After a beat, he added, "When the Snow Empress advances later, stay nearby. Don't go too far. If possible, observe closely. It will make your own advancement much easier." The Ice Empress was speechless. She knew he meant well, but asking her to watch them do business up close just made it worse. She pressed her lips together and grew even more sullen. After a moment, she sank into an ice chair, resting her cheek on one hand, her golden eyes listless as they tracked the two distant figures. Kong Ming'an adjusted his state, reviewed the upcoming advancement procedure, and looked toward the Snow Empress waiting quietly at his side. With their tightly clasped hands as a bridge, their auras linked instantly. In unison, their forms became two streams of light that ascended, intertwined, and fused in the air. A more solid figure gradually descended. A white-haired, blue-eyed youth. His face was Kong Ming'an's, yet it carried the Snow Empress's chill and ethereal grace, along with a gentle serenity the Snow Empress herself did not display. The Ice Empress couldn't help it. Her eyes locked on the youth, and shamefully her throat bobbed. A flash of alarm crossed her mind. The longer she'd been around this scoundrel, the weaker her resistance had grown. In the past, remembering that this existence resulted from the Snow Empress and Ming'an undergoing body integration would sober her quickly, keeping her emotions in check. Now, however, the youth in that state felt even more tempting. A creeping sense of danger spread through her. Her intuition warned that she might be in peril. Kong Ming'an, having fused once more with the Snow Empress using a spirit fusion skill, opened his eyes. He felt the vast, ocean-like energy of the Snow Empress flowing inside him, and the corner of his mouth curved. He was experiencing firsthand the power of the star ring method he had devised. Clenching his fist and then releasing it, he fully adapted to his new state. and a majestic aura flooded the surroundings. Without hesitation, he traced a pattern in the air. A complex spatial magic array sprang into being, and amid its flashing light, thousands of soul cores, emitting pure spirit power fluctuations and specially encapsulated, drifted out like stars, illuminating the entire ice cave. These were one of the products of the Soul Points system now in effect across the Tianhun Empire. Spirit masters routinely sold portions of their spirit power for soul points, saving them to buy customized spirit rings later in hopes of evolving their own spirit. The spirit power they sold was first converted into generic, non-attributed spirit power and stored in the spirit power pool inside the undead demiplane. From there, Ming'an purified, compressed, and packaged it into the standard soul cores now floating before him, easy to store and ready for use. It was, in effect, the strength of a whole nation of spirit masters being mobilized to support a single person. And the thousands of soul cores before him were only a fraction of his stockpile. Not enormous, but more than enough for his present purpose. Ming'an's expression remained composed. 5-star rings, each with swirling stellar vortexes inside, spun faster beside him, creating a powerful suction like 5 invisible maws, greedily devouring the suspended soul cores. The pure spirit power was rapidly absorbed and converted by the soul cores within the star rings, then stored inside the spirit rings. The 5-star rings arranged themselves at the points of a 5-pointed star and began to rotate. From within them, transparent filaments condensed from spirit power and mental force, weaving at the center like the most precise loom. In moments, the prototype of an ice-blue soul core, suffused with the aura of extreme ice, took shape. Beside it, another ice-blue spirit ring materialized, the pre-modified star ring waiting to bear the soul core. He guided that ring beneath the newly formed core. The connection formed naturally and tightened. The instant the spirit ring fully stabilized, the soul core dropped and fit perfectly into the reserved structure at the ring's center. A faint, rule-bound hum sounded. At that moment, the 6th star ring achieved perfection. The Snow Empress's aura surged upward anew, a vast pressure that spread like a tangible force and instantly enveloped the entire northern core. Countless powerful spirit beasts, whatever their cultivation, felt the presence and instinctively bowed toward the snow mountain in reverence to their emperor. That, however, was only the beginning. Under Ming'an's control, the 6-star rings detached from their original orbits and formed the corners of a perfect hexagon in front of him. They began rotating synchronously and resonating at a specific frequency. This was the star ring resonance method, born from the crude isotopic soul core resonance method, but repeatedly refined by Ming'an and the spiritual pivot, tailored specifically for spell cultivators. During the resonance, the spirit power stored in the 6-star rings, now extraordinarily pure and vast after continuous enhancement, began to collide, compress, and condense violently. The thousands of standard soul cores being fed into the process acted as perfect fuel, accelerating the reaction again and again. The long staircase to godhood had begun. Chapter 164. Harnessing the power of the star rings to forge godhood. Under the resonance of the 6-star rings, the aura climbed relentlessly, as if approaching some unsurpassable limit. Even in her normal state, Snow Empress, wielding 6-star rings, already possessed spirit power that skirted the threshold of the divine rank. Now, like a climber making the final sprint, that near-divine power, amplified by resonance and outside augmentation, launched its last assault toward true divinity. At a barely perceptible moment, a wisp of aura unlike any before appeared at the core of the resonance, transcendent, beyond the mortal, as if it brushed the very origin of the world. The instant it formed, Ming'an's intent seized and isolated it. This was divine soul force, born from a quantitative accumulation erupting into qualitative change, the ultimate sublimation of mortal spirit power. Without hesitation, Ming'an connected inward and withdrew Snow Empress's original spirit core, the primal extreme ice spirit core she first condensed as the foundation of all her power. Methodically, he injected that wisp of divine soul force into the original spirit core. The forging had begun. His aim was more than a mere enhancement. He intended to forge godhood. This was the second step on his path toward godhood, the star ring method having been the first. The idea had sprung from the Spirit Master's Spirit Core system, creating a new, higher-level energy core by driving spirit power through gradual qualitative transformation into divine soul force. But circumstances had shifted. Sea God's divine force had revealed to him the specific form of high-level energy. The structural knowledge of God positions given by the first-generation Asura God supplied the principles and forging methods for an Asura God position origin, and possessing part of the Asura God position origin himself let him intuit the completed state. These factors altered his thinking fundamentally. He no longer sought a simple upgrade to the energy core. He would directly forge godhood and make it the new origin of power for a spell cultivator. Just as the Asura God position origin is the seat of the Asura God, godhood would become the origin for the spell cultivator, cornerstone for the second step of his path to godhood. After guiding and injecting the first wisp of divine soul force, many more began to emerge at the core of the six-ring resonance, compressed and transmuted like bamboo shoots after rain. Kong Ming'an channeled every new strand into the original spirit core. The spirit core's essence slowly altered. Its internal energy structure underwent essential leaps and qualitative reformation under the scouring and rebuilding of divine soul force. Time stretched on. At the moment success became inevitable, the flow of divine soul force ceased and the six-star rings naturally dissipated. The ice-blue spirit core outwardly seemed unchanged. Same color, same form, the same faint aura fluctuations. But at its core it was entirely different. Godhood had been born. There were no cataclysmic displays, no world-shattering auras. Its birth was as quiet and orderly as melting ice or growing plants. Kong Ming'an guided the newly forged godhood back into Snow Empress's body. The moment it returned, the central structure of her power transformed. The star ring method was founded on star rings forged from spirit rings. Each star ring functioned as an independent energy circulation system to solve a spell cultivator's inability to directly bear vast amounts of energy. Now, those six previously independent systems gained a new, higher governing core, godhood. From then on, Snow Empress's star rings were no longer isolated. They were interconnected through godhood. The circulations kept their independence to maintain stability and overload tolerance, but energy could now flow and transform most efficiently via godhood. A grander cycle was established. The star rings devoured and purified spirit power as nutrients. One portion was retained by the rings, another portion transported to godhood. Godhood, acting like the most efficient furnace, converted that intake into higher-level divine soul force and output it to the whole system, nourishing body, mind, and soul, and feeding back into the star rings themselves. Where the star rings had once purified and transformed spirit power, a second, more advanced energy transformation cycle, centered on godhood, now began. The second cornerstone on the path to godhood had been cast. Is this kid cheating? Outside the water house on the Lake of Life, in the God realm, the first-generation Asura God, projecting a clone of his consciousness through the Asura God position origin on Tang Sect's body, glanced at the projection before him and could not help but complain. The God of Destruction regarded the Asura God coolly and, instead of answering, watched Kong Ming'an as he merged with Snow Empress, then offered a succinct assessment. From sheer strength, he's roughly at the level of a third-rank divinity with a god position, the God of Destruction said. But his life level is still at limit duluo. It's in the middle of a transformation, and even when the transformation completes, it hasn't reached the limit of transformation. The God of Destruction's expression darkened. How could this be? His own energy quality matched the divine force of a third-rank divinity. His strength could overwhelm a normal third-rank divinity, and yet the opponent's life level remained at limit duluo. The legacy he had chosen seemed increasingly uncanny. The Asura God chuckled, then grew serious. Notice, this so-called star ring method has only condensed 6 star rings so far. If 6 star rings can reach third-rank divinity strength, what about 9? Not to mention jumping directly to second-rank divinity. At minimum, he'd be a top-tier third rank. If he takes another step forward, he could hit second rank. He paused, letting the implications sink in. And if my inference is right, his life level would still be at limit duluo then. On the next step, he might break through that life level into the divinity's qualitative shift, and his strength would leap to first-rank deity. This, the god of destruction hesitated, skepticism flickering across his face. The Asura god's claim was simply too fantastic. The Asura god only smiled and said calmly, "If you look at it properly, there are really only 4 broad stages of life. First, below divinity, the mortal domain. Mortals have limited lifespans, can't step into the cosmos on their own, and are usually tied to their own plane. Second, divinity, from 3rd rank up to 1st rank divinity. Beings at this level are what mortals call immortals. Their lifespans are long, even effectively limitless. Third, god kings like you and me. They stand above ordinary divinity, qualify to rule star systems, have absolute mastery over their power and an understanding of the laws. Fourth, beyond God King, there's not much to say about that here." He turned his gaze toward the matter at hand. "That child has only barely absorbed some divinity-level power from the mortal domain. It's unorthodox, yes, but not impossible." The god of destruction fell silent, then softened. It was absurd for a mortal to reach divinity-level power, but absurdity didn't equal impossibility. What unsettled him was the speed. How long had this child been cultivating? If this was his progress now, where would he be in 10 or 20 years? A faint excitement stirred in the god of destruction at the thought. On the Duluo plain, inside the ice cavern, the roaring, vast aura receded like the tide and finally calmed. A flash of light burst around Kong Ming'an, who had been in fusion, and the fusion broke. He and the Snow Empress separated and fell back to the ground. The Snow Empress raised her hand without thinking, stared at her palm with ice-blue eyes, then slowly closed her fist. She felt the terrifying current of power flowing inside the nascent divinity lodged within her, and a subtle ripple passed through her gaze. "How do you feel?" Kong Ming'an asked, noticing the shift. Her expression was slightly dazed. She whispered, almost sleepily, "It feels like a dream." The change was undeniable. She could sense she had stepped into the level she had chased for tens of thousands of years, the domain of divinity. And the transformation wasn't finished. The cycle between the divinity and the star ring kept pushing her farther, driving the change towards some limit. What had taken her millennia to pursue had been achieved in a few short years. Normally, a person would be elated. Instead, she felt a profound calm, as if this had always been meant to happen. She paused, turned, and met the man beside her. The ripple in her ice-blue eyes deepened, but she tamped it down. With him there, she thought, it was only natural. Kong Ming'an looked at her, puzzled by the unusual look in her eyes. The Snow Empress didn't reply. She blinked, her gaze drifting, and for a moment it lingered on Kong Ming'an's lips. Beneath the habitual cold between her brows, something stirred, restless. Then, without preamble, she reached for his hand, gave it a gentle tug, leaned forward, and moved closer. A cool touch brushed Kong Ming'an's lips. It was clear and direct, sudden, yet somehow following her own internal logic. After that brief contact, she slipped back and straightened beside him, as if nothing unusual had happened. Kong Ming'an was stunned, confusion still written on his face. He opened his mouth to speak when a white and green figure streaked into the cave, bristling with anxiety. "How did it go? Nothing went wrong, right?" The Ice Empress's voice came before she did. The two of them had been pushing their limits. The last moments had forced her to retreat. Her golden eyes darted over them until she saw their auras calm and uninjured, and only then did she exhale in relief. The Snow Empress's expression had already returned to its eternal coolness, as if that brief contact had never occurred. Her voice was flat and composed. There were no accidents. The increase in strength was real. Power flowed efficiently under the control of the nascent divinity within her. It wasn't just a qualitative jump in spirit power. Her body, spirit, and soul had all been elevated. The constant, subtle transformation was hard to put into words, but it was unmistakable. The Ice Empress stared, suddenly envious that she could no longer fully comprehend the Snow Empress's aura. The envy quickly shifted into fierce determination. If the Snow Empress could do it, she could try too. According to the Asura god's explanation, condensing a divinity depended heavily on innate talent, comprehension, and accumulation. Under the star ring system, not everyone condensed divinity at the 6-ring stage. She might not replicate it perfectly, but reaching for the seventh star ring might still be within reach. Kong Ming'an watched quietly, not joining the conversation. The Snow Empress's abrupt move had left him unsettled, so he took a moment to steady himself. He kept one hand in hers, sensing whether the Snow Empress's state had stabilized. Her hand slipped over his, and his thoughts stalled. He met her cool, unreadable gaze. Then she spoke, calm as ever. "No rush. You can test me slowly later." Kong Ming'an blinked at the wording, which felt oddly phrased, but he nodded. "All right." The Ice Empress watched the exchange, frowning. The interaction between them felt oddly intimate, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that something had happened. She tried to tell herself nothing had, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The Ice Empress didn't linger long in the ice cave. There was nothing for her to do, truly nothing. Kong Ming'an sat with his eyes closed, his hands still clasping the Snow Empress's. 6 ice-blue star rings turned slowly around him, a clear sign that he was in a deep state of perception. The Snow Empress remained motionless as well, her ice-blue eyes unblinking as they watched Kong Ming'an, who was immersed in his observation. She stood silently at his side, watching them both with an eager, somewhat out-of-place expression. The cave was so quiet that all anyone could hear was their breathing. After hesitating, the Ice Empress decided to go. She wanted to report to the other spirit beasts in the core and calm them with news of the aura the Snow Empress had released during her breakthrough. More importantly, she no longer wanted to feel like an awkward appendage, a spirit-guiding lamp who didn't belong. That sense of being the odd one out weighed on her, so she stepped away to get some fresh air. One last look at the two still absorbed in their own world, and she left. Inside the cave, only Kong Ming'an and the Snow Empress remained. Time passed in silence. Eventually, Kong Ming'an opened his eyes. After a careful scan, he confirmed the Snow Empress's condition was stable and posed no danger. He let out a small sigh of relief and looked up. She had moved closer without him noticing. Their gazes met, and they were so near they could hear each other breathe. "Snow Empress?" Kong Ming'an said softly. The Snow Empress hesitated, then asked, "Is there something wrong with my body?" "There's nothing wrong with your body," he said, averting his eyes slightly. "But there are other issues." He reached into his belt and produced a standard soul core. Look, he placed the soul core into one of the star rings that hovered by the Snow Empress. The ring, like an ice-blue nebula, rotated, crushed the soul core, and instantly absorbed it, converting it into pure energy to raise the Snow Empress's cultivation. As if sensing something, she frowned subtly. "You felt that, didn't you?" Kong Ming'an asked. The Snow Empress hummed, still very close. Her face was expressionless but professional. She shielded him from noticing some of the finer details. After a moment of sensing, she said, "This soul core's contribution to me is negligible, almost ignorable." Kong Ming'an nodded. "That's because the star rings are built on the spirit ring system. Until you transform all 9 spirit rings into star rings at once, you're essentially still a limit duo. Your life essence remains at the limit duo level, but if we only talk about combat power, given your god position and 6 star rings, you're roughly comparable to a newly ascended 3rd-rank divinity." The Snow Empress inched closer and listened as Kong Ming'an continued. "Even though you're physically limit duo, your strength has reached divine rank. Ordinary resources and ordinary energy are ineffective." "Right," he confirmed. He had puzzled over this himself when he first learned about god positions from the Asura god. Divinities of the god position didn't normally continue improving by directly absorbing the plane's heaven and earth origin chi. Instead, they collected power of faith. Why not just keep absorbing the plane's origin chi? The explanation wasn't explicit in the Asura god's teachings, but now it was clear. For divine rank existences, ordinary energy's quality is too low. Absorbing immense amounts of common heaven and earth origin chi is inefficient and also harmful to the plane itself. Power of faith, by contrast, is a high-grade energy, abundant, renewable, and highly compatible with the god position system, so it naturally became the mainstream choice. The spell cultivator path was different. It took spirit power as its origin and advanced by devouring and refining various energies to transform and improve its spirit power. Kong Ming'an didn't want to dilute the purity of the spell cultivator method unless absolutely necessary. For now, he said, aside from the little energy you need to maintain your state, you shouldn't keep absorbing the plane's heaven and earth origin chi. He understood why the god realm required divinities to leave their birth planes after ascension. Most planes can give rise to divinities, but they can't sustain them. If the Snow Empress were to draw heavily on the Duluo plane's origin chi to keep advancing, the drain would be enormous, effectively bleeding the plane dry. Excessive loss and disruption of the natural cycle would damage the plane's origin. That was unacceptable. The Snow Empress acknowledged this. Don't worry. I already have a rough plan and won't delay long. You should focus on adapting to your own strength for now. Kong Ming'an had already been thinking ahead. If the Duluo plane couldn't sustain divinities, they would have to look outward. There were two obvious directions. One was other planes, the Abyss plane, the Demon plane, and others. With the God Realm's backing, he could strike out at weaker planes first and gradually work his way up. Resolving the Abyss plane might even reveal the Crimson plane's coordinates. Even if he failed, he could call for help. That was the advantage of his background. The other direction was beyond the planes, the boundless universe itself. Planes absorb energy from the universe to strengthen their foundations. Kong Ming'an could try to do the same directly, taking energy from outside the planes. The approach wasn't impossible. He was thinking this over when warm air brushed his face. Startled, he looked up and realized the Snow Empress was almost touching him. Her snow-white hair fell naturally, and her ice-blue eyes regarded him calmly but with unmistakable intensity. Her tall form was outlined under the crystalline light, the elegant white dress tracing graceful curves. Everything looked so clear in the cave's light that Kong Ming'an's thoughts came to an abrupt halt. A halt in his thoughts was inevitable. He wasn't the sort to let his spiritual pivot be swayed by outside influences, yet against certain people, his resistance was surprisingly low. He lowered his gaze to the Snow Empress, so close he could almost taste the coolness of her skin if he leaned forward. His voice softened. "Snow Empress?" "I was just confirming something," she replied, still cool, but with an unmistakable certainty. "Earlier, you weren't satisfied." She meant the kiss that had started and stopped so abruptly. Kong Ming'an understood at once. He paused, then steadied himself. "Perhaps I didn't react?" The Snow Empress's expression did not change. Her beautiful face remained impassive, but she leaned in again, her chill presence nearly enveloping him. At that time, Binger was there. "So?" Kong Ming'an replied curtly. It wasn't a question, but a direct command to continue. Without hesitation, she closed the distance between them until it was almost gone. Kong Ming'an froze for a moment, staring into her ice-blue eyes that reflected only him. Then, in the next instant, cool, hard lips were on his. Hands rose to his neck and gently tilted his head. The initial chill kissed his mouth, then quickly melted into warmth under clumsy, earnest motion. Time slowed. Kong Ming'an naturally slid an arm around the Snow Empress's waist to keep her from slipping away. For a while, they stayed locked together. Then she let go. He looked down at her, their breathing uneven, eyelashes fluttering, the coldness of her demeanor touched with unexpected tenderness. A question darkened his gaze. She, however, seemed to read it before he spoke. She lifted her face and met him with steady, ice-blue eyes. "I once left a mark on you," she said plainly. "It can protect you for me. It can also record the chi of those you come into contact with." Kong Ming'an's expression tightened, understanding dawning. He had expected that the Snow Empress might have seen through his situation, but hadn't imagined it would be so simple. Maybe he had been exposed the moment they first met. He kept silent, then asked, "Then why?" "Because everything about me already belongs to you, doesn't it?" she finished, her tone flat, as if this had always been the case. Before he could answer, she leaned in again. Their lips met, and the sweet stickiness cut off any unspoken words. She closed her eyes. One hand idly swept behind her, and, in the next moment, a thick wall of extreme ice rose soundlessly from the cave floor, sealing the entrance. Inside the ice cavern, light and shadow dimmed. It was only the two of them. Outside the cave, the Ice Empress, who had already informed the spirit beasts of the far north, was making her way back, torn and bewildered. At the center of her turmoil was the Snow Empress. They had spent tens of thousands of years together, slept side by side, guarded and upheld one another through the long ages. Then the Snow Empress had become that man's protector, and everything changed. The man had taken the Snow Empress from her, and anger drove the Ice Empress to confront him. But then events had gone oddly awry. She'd first witnessed his power, then been tricked into a contract, and gradually found herself dragged onto his ship. Before she knew it, she was trapped, helpless, with no escape. Looking back, she realized how thoroughly she had been played, how powerless she had been, and worse, that she had even found herself approaching him. That inexplicable, confusing set of feelings left her conflicted. She drifted, nearly without noticing, up to the cave entrance. Her steps faltered when she saw the thick ice wall, radiating the familiar cold of the Snow Empress. Curious, she extended a hand. The extreme ice posed no barrier to her. Her consciousness and perception slipped through easily. She was about to send a message to ask what was happening when, the instant her perception touched the scene inside, it hit her like an electric shock. She snatched her hand back. Her mind blanked. Her expression froze. She swallowed hard and felt her pupils tremble. Doubt flickered through her. Had she imagined it? She pressed her palm to the wall again, forcing herself to see more clearly. This time, clearer sounds and blurred images flooded her mind. The Ice Empress's breath caught. She kept her hand on the ice for a full 10 seconds before she staggered back into reality and drew it away. She gasped, her eyes dazed, as if she had seen something terrifying. Her pale cheeks flushed, color rushing up her face. They are, she murmured, voice small and disbelieving. Her thoughts scattered, but the fragments of sound and image filled in with disconcerting clarity, recreating scenes her mind couldn't fully accept. They? How now? How? Her words broke into stammers as her imagination raced ahead of reason. She stared at the ice barrier as if it hid something unbearable. Her knees went weak and she sank to the ground. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. At once a new, indescribable sensation rose in her, a tangled mix of keen curiosity, bitter pangs, and a strange, insistent throb she couldn't name. Against her better judgment, she leaned closer. Her hand trembled as she pressed it to the icy wall again. Even clearer sounds poured into her mind than before. She did not pull away this time. Her eyes shook. One hand remained fixed on the cold surface, while the other, as if guided by invisible threads, trembled and reached for the hem of her white and green robe. 108. I was run over by the older sister, sad. Under the light from the countless special crystals embedded in the ceiling, the ice cavern was as bright as day. It should have been bone-chilling cold, but now the air carried a hint of lazy warmth that made the place almost comfortable. Kong Ming'an sat on the enormous 10,000-year profound ice at the cavern's center, head bowed, one hand rubbing his temples. He felt utterly exhausted, the kind of fatigue you get after pulling several all-nighters only to be yanked awake by a phone call from a mentor, junior brother, or junior sister to clean up someone else's mess. Drowsiness and a throbbing headache tangled into a haze. He and the Snow Empress had spent an unknown span of time here, day after day. The tension between his brows wouldn't fade. Kong Ming'an hated to admit it, but the facts were unmistakable. Facing the Snow Empress, who had already reached divine rank, he was absolutely outclassed. The body cultivator path was steady and incremental. His physique had improved, and his physical strength exceeded his spirit power rank, but against the Snow Empress, it still felt insufficient. Add the incident with Zhang Lexuan, and her surface calm only hid lingering anger. During this stretch, she had scarcely allowed him any real rest. In short, he had been crushed by Big Sister, and he was exhausted. This couldn't go on. He had to find a way to strengthen the body cultivator path. The spell cultivator route had already stepped onto the second stage of the stairway to godhood. The body cultivator's chi and blood furnace was still only a concept. Whether for the path itself or to regain confidence, he needed to put it into practice immediately. A sudden surge of resolve rose in him. At that moment, the Snow Empress stirred beside him and sat up. She was wearing one of his oversized shirts loosely. It clung to her frame, but the buttons were mostly undone, leaving it casually open and revealing a sculpted collarbone and a patch of smooth, luminous skin. Her long, snow-white hair spread out behind her, making her ice-blue eyes seem even sharper. Her expression was as reserved as ever, but a faint flush on her cheeks softened her icy composure. Kong Ming'an found himself stealing a look before turning away. Then, as if by habit, she shifted closer, pressing her curves against him as though they fit together naturally. She settled more comfortably in his arms, wrapping them around his waist and resting her cheek against his neck. Her nose brushed his skin with an oddly clingy intimacy. Kong Ming'an's hand came to rest on her well-shaped back. Even through the fabric, he could feel a coolness emanating from her, like holding a piece of cold, polished jade. The chill seeped through his clothes and, oddly, cleared some of the fog in his mind. They stayed like that a while, until she lifted her head and met his gaze. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, voice clear and cold as ever, but with no real fluctuation. He looked at her, close enough to see the faint color on her cheeks, and answered evenly, "I'm wondering if you're still angry." She paused, then said in an indifferent tone, "I was never angry." "I don't believe you," he replied. If she truly wasn't angry, why had she not let him rest? She had even dropped offhand remarks like, "Were you and her like this too?" which had been terrifying. Zhang Lexuan's temperament was already a headache. He didn't want the Snow Empress to be the same. She blinked without answering, then, without much preamble, bit his shoulder. Not a hard bite, but not light either. A clear teeth mark appeared on his skin. She straightened, nonchalant. "I'm not angry anymore." One bite and they were even? Kong Ming'an was speechless, then let out a small sigh. He decided to drop the subject for now and asked a more important question. "What should we do about Ice Empress?" The Snow Empress shook her head. "That depends more on you." "So this is why you made her listen outside the ice wall for 5 hours?" He was too tired to scold properly. The image of Binger lingering outside while the Snow Empress kept him pressed for time had muddled his thoughts. The ice wall isn't a barrier to Binger. If she had wanted to come in, she could have, easily. It's Binger herself who chose not to, or rather, she didn't dare, the Snow Empress said calmly. Having lived with Ice Empress for tens of thousands of years, she knew her sister's nature perfectly. There was no mistake in her red. Kong Ming'an's headache deepened. What if she had come in? Then we would have done it together. The Snow Empress said it with a poker face and a shocking casualness. She looked at him, almost serene. Binger cannot escape. Doing it together would only be a matter of time. Or are you saying? She tilted her head, a hint of confusion in her pure, ice-blue eyes. You want to include others? Miss Meng? Young Miss Xu? I don't mind if they agree. Absolutely not, Kong Ming'an blurted. His reputation with the Snow Empress felt fragile and needed protecting. She didn't press it. Instead, she hugged him, burying her face in his arms and inhaling deeply. After a moment, she offered another plan. Matter-of-factly, Binger probably thinks we don't know she was lingering outside. If we pretend we didn't know either, she will likely pretend nothing happened. That gives her some time to process things, and at least she won't think of hunting you down to silence you. That is something she would do, Kong Ming'an sighed. Hunting wouldn't be a literal hunt, and silencing him wouldn't be literal either, but with Ice Empress's personality, she would probably hide and refuse to speak to him. They exchanged a look, understanding and a little helplessness in both their eyes. Let Binger think it over for a while. We aren't short on time, and she will eventually be unable to resist, the Snow Empress concluded calmly. Then she looked up at him again, eyes blinking, and added casually, as if stating a fact, "Perhaps if we do this a few more times, Binger won't be able to resist coming in." Kong Ming'an could only stare. Strengthening the body cultivator path suddenly felt more urgent than ever. The thought of Binger later being relentlessly bullied by the Snow Empress and the protagonist made him inwardly smirk. P.S. I'll push Chewer's storyline forward a bit later and use her as a template to improve the body cultivator path. Otherwise, the protagonist really won't stand a chance against the Snow Empress down the line. P.S.S. Deciding to strengthen the body cultivator path only because the Snow Empress kept crushing him. Doesn't that prove she is the primary driving force behind his progress? After a short while, Kong Ming'an rose and dressed. Behind him, the Snow Empress removed the shirt she'd borrowed from him, changed back into her usual white gown, and resumed her customary cold composure. She stepped closer, took Kong Ming'an's hand as if it were natural, and together they left the ice cave. The ice wall that had once separated inside from out had already melted away. Aside from a few shards, the ground looked as if nothing at all had happened. Not long after they emerged, the Snow Empress's presence shifted. An invisible majesty radiated from her, centered on her alone, and swept instantly through the core of the extreme north. Then dozens of powerful auras streaked in from all directions like meteors, descending rapidly. Wordlessly, the gathered spirit beasts moved as one and knelt. This was the absolute authority of the Snow Empress in the extreme north. To her, all living things there offered pure respect and submission. She was their sovereign. Kong Ming'an watched and had to admit it was an intimidating sight. The number of 100,000-year soul beasts in the extreme north far exceeded imagination. From their auras, most had solid foundations, formidable strength, and were generally of higher caliber than the 100,000-year soul beasts he'd seen elsewhere. It made sense. There could be no mediocrity here. Tiangmeng was the only exception. That one had simply been lucky. A ribbon of emerald spirit power drifted down, and a moment later, a girl in a white and green skirt arrived, crossing her arms with a cool, aloof expression, exactly as usual. The Ice Empress. When Kong Ming'an's gaze met hers, she visibly stiffened and quickly looked away. Then, as if remembering something, she jerked her head back up and put on a deliberately provocative grimace. "What are you staring at, face?" Kong Ming'an smiled softly. The Ice Empress's expression froze, and she turned away again, a faint flush paling the back of her ears. This was the Ice Empress, unwilling to strike first, poor at defense, and with an oddly vulnerable air that made her easy to tease. The spirit beasts did not linger. The Snow Empress had called them for two reasons, one overt, one hidden. Overtly, she was announcing her breakthrough. Her ascent bolstered the extreme north's confidence and proved her path right. Hiddenly, she wanted to introduce Kong Ming'an to them. From the moment they left the cave, she had not let go of his hand. Many of the spirit beast's gazes lingered on him with equal parts suspicion and curiosity, then settled on the hands clasped between him and the Snow Empress. Once they exchanged knowing looks, they respectfully withdrew. What had been suspicion became confirmation. The extreme north now had an empress consort. The spirit beasts dispersed. Soon, only the Ice Empress and another 100,000-year soul beast, whose true form was an ice butterfly, remained with Kong Ming'an and the Snow Empress. The Ice Butterfly clan was naturally clever. Because they fed on ice spirit flowers in the extreme north's heart, they enjoyed the Snow Empress's protection. In return, they acted as her subordinates, relaying orders and gradually taking on a butler-like role to manage the land's daily affairs. Asking the Ice Empress to handle such trivialities would have been cruel. She would have hated it. The Ice Empress glanced once at Kong Ming'an, then went straight to the Snow Empress's side, moving so quickly it looked like she was running away. The ice butterfly floated forward a few paces, bowed respectfully to everyone, and then looked at Kong Ming'an with solemn courtesy. Empress Consort. Kong Ming'an paused, smiled, and made no objection to the odd title. He only said gently, "Give me the documents." The ice butterfly nodded and transmitted several documents through the spiritual pivot. Since Kong Ming'an had been upgrading the spiritual pivot, many spirit beasts in the extreme north had become users of it. He had even put together a set of teaching materials for them, basic knowledge of human society to help spirit beasts become familiar with it in advance. Kong Ming'an skimmed the files. The first was a phase report for the project called Enlightenment. The plan revolved around an enlightenment formation. Elder Yi had specially designed for spirit beasts, intended to help them awaken their intelligence sooner, take human form earlier, and accelerate their cultivation using the human physique. It was one solution to the human spirit-beast conflict. Because he had to heed the will of the plane, his approach had been gentle. One idea was to allow spirit beasts to transform directly into humans, thereby removing the basis for conflict. If everyone were human, disputes would be between people rather than between species. Once the spiritual pivot upgrades were complete, an ideal social order built on order and judgment could emerge. To avoid new conflicts forming, the focus of many beings on the Duluo plane would be gradually directed outward. Since the experiment was being run in the extreme north, Kong Ming'an had consulted the Snow Empress beforehand. She raised few objections. She cared only for the citizens of the extreme north. No matter what form her people's bodies took, they would always be her citizens and under her protection. With her consent, the plan had been set in motion. Beyond enlightenment, the files contained research on how spirit beasts in the extreme north adapted to the spell cultivator and body cultivator systems, plus other related compilations. Kong Ming'an was mainly responsible for promoting these cultivation systems and handling practical issues in their rollout. More complex matters, construction plans, resource allocation for the extreme north, were Juzi's domain. She was the expert there. In the biting cold of the ice plain, Kong Ming'an and the ice butterfly worked through the documents in a brisk question-and-answer exchange. Nearby, the Snow Empress and the Ice Empress sat on a great slab of ice, watching in silence. 170. Hyote's little Chu girl is in a mess. The Ice Empress and the Snow Empress hardly spoke. The Snow Empress was naturally reserved and rarely spoke much, and the Ice Empress, having been caught eavesdropping by the wall, didn't really know what to say. She sat there wrapped in a confusing mix of shame, anger, guilt, and a strange fluttering anticipation. Her heart was in knots. She found her eyes drifting, almost of their own accord, toward Kong Ming'an, who was talking with the ice butterfly in the distance. She would catch herself and look away. The Snow Empress watched those tiny movements and finally broke the silence first. "Binger, aren't you going back with him?" she asked. The Ice Empress tightened for a moment, but quickly recovered. She shook her head and answered with as much sincerity as she could manage. "No, I'll stay here with you." The Snow Empress's hand, pale and delicate, reached out and pinched the Ice Empress's puffed cheek. The touch was cool and soft, satisfying in an odd way. "You're being contradictory." Her voice was soft, carrying an almost certain calm. "No regrets?" Binger pressed her lips together and turned her face away, refusing to look at the Snow Empress or at Kong Ming'an. She said petulantly, "How could I possibly regret it because of him?" The Snow Empress didn't argue. She watched quietly. Feeling that steady, assessing gaze made the Ice Empress fidget. The confidence she had tried to present began to evaporate. Her guilt swelled again. After a long pause, she tried to bolster herself, forcing out another declaration. "Anyway, I don't regret it." The Snow Empress considered and then shifted tactics. "Once my cultivation stabilizes, I'll go to him. Do you want to come?" Binger's face went serious, adopting a practical tone. "I'll go with you." The Snow Empress shook her head, looked into Binger's golden eyes, and said faintly, "You're simply being contradictory." Binger fell silent, stubbornly refusing to admit the truth. A flicker of helplessness passed across the Snow Empress's features. It seemed a new approach would be needed. She fell into contemplation, watching the other intently. Meanwhile, Binger's gaze, despite herself, kept being drawn to Kong Ming'an. Each time she saw his tall, slender figure, the unformed, intense scenes that troubled her surged up again. Her cheeks warmed, a faint blush spreading as if she had been burned. She tore her eyes away, heart racing, knees weak. Then, like a moth to a flame, she found herself glancing back, only to hastily look away as those memories churned inside her. After repeating this a few times, she felt dizzy and breathless. Kong Ming'an, after settling the necessary affairs in the extreme Northland, did not remain long. His original purpose for the trip had been to deal with the Snow Empress's promotion matters and to finalize the God Ascent stairway concept. What should have taken 2 or 3 days had been stretched to over a week because of the Snow Empress's situation. If he didn't return soon, he'd burn out. After a brief, somewhat awkward farewell with the Snow Empress and the Ice Empress, Kong Ming'an stepped into the spatial ripples and vanished. The next instant, he was back in his private laboratory in the Kong Family Chamber of Commerce in the capital. Space in the lab twisted, and he materialized quietly. His gaze swept the room and stopped, a hint of surprise crossing his face. In a corner, cross-legged and deep in meditation, was Wang Donger. Her spirit power circulated steadily. She breathed long and even. From the fluctuations, her cultivation looked to be around ranks 43 or 44. She wasn't the lazy girl described in the original work, far from it. Having gone through so much, she had changed and grown diligent in her cultivation. The sea god martial soul she carried was a precious research subject. The more she strengthened, the more the sea god martial soul would be nourished and enhanced. It was a strategically prepared step toward Tang San's sea god's throne. Cultivating her was a worthy investment, whether as an assistant or a future piece on the chessboard. Kong Ming'an watched her for a moment, interest flickering through his eyes. He didn't disturb her and moved quietly to the experimental bench. He connected to the spiritual pivot and the light screen flared to life. Countless star systems of data and several draft plans for the next phase of reinforcement in the body cultivator system scrolled across the display. He glanced through them and frowned. The fundamental difficulty in advancing the body cultivator system was simply a lack of sufficiently powerful, representative samples. The spell cultivator system had advanced rapidly, and the god ascent stairway construction had gone smoothly, largely because they had high-level templates to reference. The body cultivator side had no comparable models to emulate. Kong Ming'an sighed softly, murmuring to himself, "What a pity. We don't have top-tier physical body samples, and the god of destruction would never agree to let me dissect the sealed golden dragon king. Too hard to control, too risky." He pushed that insoluble problem aside and turned to other projects, mass-producing 1,000 refined metal, Mecha research, and the preliminary battle armor concept. They were difficult too, but at least their direction was clear. Strengthening the body cultivator system could be a long-term plan. He settled into work, processing the forging samples Xiao Hongqian had sent over the past few days. Time slipped by in focused research. At one point, midway through an experiment, he paused, a look of surprise crossing his face. He had sensed a sudden change. His expression grew strange. He muttered, almost to himself, "Has the plane's will grown this strong?" Far above, the Kong family Chamber of Commerce's surface buildings were a bright, orderly commercial area meant for receiving guests. But its core lay deep underground, more than 100 floors descending in a maze-like structure. There were warehouses for the chamber's vast reserves, research labs, soul tool development, and numerous classified projects. Security there was strict. On the 12th subterranean floor, the soul tool elevator's door slid open quietly. A female employee in the Chamber of Commerce uniform stepped out, focused on the light screen projected by the spiritual pivot as she moved. Right behind her, like a ghost sliding on air, a tall figure slipped in the instant the door opened. She had hair like a golden waterfall and blood-red eyes like polished glass, and a faint expression of curiosity on her delicate face as she looked around without a hint of restraint. It was Chiwer, who had secretly infiltrated the Kong family Chamber of Commerce. She shadowed the staff member ahead, and using the moment he passed identity verification, slipped past several authorization gates. The spirit monitoring devices embedded in the walls, which gave off faint spirit power pulses, seemed to ignore the uninvited guest. Their scanning beams swept over her without picking anything up. Chiwer's expression remained calm. A silver dragon scale pendant rested against her chest and sent out almost imperceptible ripples. From it expanded a subtle, invisible field that warped the light and elements around her, wrapping her in concealment and perfectly hiding her aura. The pendant's protection came from divine rank power. Under its absolute cloak, the chamber's ordinary monitoring systems felt almost laughable. Soon, following the staff member, Chier arrived at a spacious hall. This was the 12th underground floor, an employee rest area, wide and well-appointed, with soft lighting that simulated sunlight to ease the strain of intense work. People moved through it, some speaking in low voices, others hurrying by. Everything seemed efficient and orderly. Chiwer, invisible to sensors and to most eyes, drifted through the crowd until she slipped into an empty tea room. She leaned against the long refreshment table, plucked an ornate cake from the plates supplied in abundance, and began nibbling. With a flick of her finger, a plain-looking notebook appeared in her hand. She opened it. The pages were filled with entries. Underground 1, Basic Materials Warehouse. No traces of luck. Underground 6, Large Conference Area. Spirit Power Barrier High Rank. No traces of luck. Underground 8, Ecological Simulation Botanical Garden. Abundant Life Aura. No traces of luck. Chiwer frowned at the list and pouted in dissatisfaction. She shoved the last bite of cake into her mouth, licked cream from her fingers, then took out a pen and wrote on a fresh line. Underground 12, employee rest area, densely populated, complex environment, no traces of luck. She snapped the notebook shut and sighed, an edge of irritation in her voice. Why haven't I found it yet? Patience was never her strength, especially after days of dead ends. If it weren't for her lord sister's orders, she would have bolted long ago. At first, she had tried staking out the Kong family residence itself, but that yielded little. The dragon scale pendant her lord sister had given her, pressed to her chest, warned that unpredictable dangers awaited inside the Kong family grounds, so she had chosen not to infiltrate the residence. Instead, she turned to the Chamber of Commerce. Protected by the scale, she had mapped the above-ground and shallow underground levels and had felt the unique thread of destiny that signaled the child of destiny. That discovery had kept her going, and when she realized there were many deep, hidden basement levels within the chamber, she became convinced her target was down below. But 4 or 5 days had passed, and she still felt like a headless fly in a labyrinth. She'd combed nearly 20 floors and still hadn't so much as brushed the shadow of her mark. The pace maddened her. She stuffed another piece of cake into her mouth as if she were biting off the frustration itself, then forced herself to breathe and think calmly. Once she found the other party, she would use the dragon scale to summon her lord sister. With her lord sister's divine might, capturing the target would be easy. She would extract the luck back. After all, part of that luck originally belonged to her, and she intended to squeeze every drop from that person. As she let herself drift into those fantasies, footsteps and low conversation approached outside the tea room. A group of people in researcher uniforms entered, still continuing a discussion they had been having. My energy conduction structure optimization experiment is basically finished, one said. Only the metal strength of the core pressure-bearing component hasn't reached theoretical values. It's stuck. You could apply to use the latest batch of semi-spirit forged alloy, another suggested. Its strength and spirit power affinity are a qualitative leap over the old 1000 forged metal. It should meet your needs. The first man's eyes brightened. Really? Is my authorization enough to apply? Yes. According to regulations, your project rank qualifies you to request a verification quota, but you'll need to retrieve it yourself from the Special Materials Warehouse on B14. Once the paperwork is approved, you can go collect it. Chewer's ears pricked up at that. Basement 124? She had only gone as deep as the 30s before. A level that deep could easily hide important clues. Excitement flashed in her crimson eyes. A moment later, the researcher received a notification, approval, and his face lit up. Good. It's approved. I can't dawdle then. The experiment's important. He hurried off. Chewer didn't delay either and trailed him. They boarded a spirit tool elevator one after another. After the researcher authenticated, the elevator descended smoothly, numbers flying by until the display stopped at Nige 124. The doors opened, and the researcher stepped out. Chewer shadowed him, but as she reached to follow, the corridor ahead shimmered like water. The researcher walked straight into the ripple without hesitation and vanished. Chewer tried to catch up, but she was a half beat too slow. By the time she stepped out, the spatial ripples had subsided, leaving her alone in the B124 corridor. No, where did he go? Chewer muttered, frowning, when a sudden freezing killing intent ripped through the air and slammed into her, overwhelming her completely. 172. Remove the armor from Miss Auspicious Beast. Chewer reacted instantly. The aura was overwhelming, stronger than any opponent she had ever faced. The icy killing intent triggered her golden dragon martial soul without thinking, shattering the disguise she'd been keeping as the young Miss Dragon King. 6 perfectly matched spirit rings, 2 yellow, 2 purple, 2 black, blinked into being and circled her. Brilliant golden light surged from within her, and her chi and blood energy roared. Her golden dragon spear formed in her hand, its spearlight trying to tear through the solidified killing domain around them. A faint sound, almost a chuckle of surprise, answered her resistance. Chewer tried to turn her head toward the source of the killing intent, but a dark red spirit ring edged with gilded patterns swelled before her eyes, and the despairing cold of its killing intent struck again. Under the absolute suppression of that power, her proud golden dragon martial soul whimpered. The aura she had just gathered was snuffed out as if doused by icy water. Her spirit power froze. Her body became like an insect trapped in amber, unable to move a finger. Stiff and immobile, Chewer stared at the figure who had appeared as if from nowhere. Her red pupils trembled. The dark red gilded ring by his side radiated a strange light that sealed off surrounding light and sound, even space itself, creating an absolute domain where only the two of them existed. Worse, his luck was of the same origin as hers, but far more concentrated. The fate power she had been born with flared up, recognizing him. The young man standing before her was the target she had hunted for so long. Frustration rose in her for the first time. He looked even younger than she did in her human form, with a calm, almost smug bearing that set her teeth on edge. He walked toward her without hurry. As he closed the distance, Chewer saw the spirit rings circling him. 2 silver glowing, 2 blood red, and the dark red gilded ring at the center. She ignored the silver and blood red rings. Her attention was fixed on that dark red ring because the killing intent it gave off felt faintly like what her lord sister had once shown her. Chewer wanted to speak, but no sound came. She could only watch as the young man reached out and took hold of her golden dragon spear. The spear that had formed from her instinctive resistance and through which she felt a connection to her heart and blood. He applied the slightest force, and an irresistible power poured from the spear, breaking the bond. Immobilized, she could not resist. The spear came free from her hand. An indescribable surge of grievance and fury filled her. The young man held the spear, and blue, data-like streams shimmered in his ink-jade eyes as he examined it with quiet seriousness. Then, to Chewer's shock, the dark red gilded spirit ring beside him split off a single, near-invisible red thread and gently bound the spear. The connection between her golden dragon martial soul and the spear was forcibly severed. She could only watch as he tossed the spear away. Ripples opened in space, and the golden dragon spear vanished into them. My golden dragon spear, she thought, roaring silently. She poured everything into struggling, but under the god-king level suppression, her body was as immovable as metal and stone. All sound and resistance were sealed. She stared at him, anger blazing in her eyes. His gaze dropped to her. Blue light flowed in his eyes, data streams leaping at the corners. He was scanning her. His look seemed to go through her clothes, skin, even flesh, probing into her soul, her spirit, her origin. A humiliating exposure washed over her, like clothes being stripped away one by one. Panic surged, but it was brief. He extended a hand. Under her fixed stare, a slender finger landed on the first button at her collar, and with a gentle flick, undid it. Panic overwhelmed her anger and shame. Chewer felt immediate danger. She forced her will to move, even if only a half step back, but her strength was laughable. Her body would not obey. She seemed to have stopped resisting entirely. As despair and humiliation spread, the second and third buttons came undone just as easily. Her collar opened slightly, revealing a patch of pale, smooth skin and delicate collarbones, the faint outline of her shoulder straps showing beneath. Tears welled in her trembling pupils. She felt the cool tip of his finger linger on her skin, then shift and slide inward through the loosened collar. It hooked something slender and, with a gentle pull, began to draw it out. The item came free, the silver dragon scale pendant she wore at her chest, an amulet that had given her concealment and protection. It fell into the man's hand. Chewer froze, a single crystal tear sliding down her cheek. There was no despair in her eyes now, only sharp, clear bewilderment. The man's target had been Lord Sister's dragon scale. Chewer, this guy keeps provoking me. Seeing the man before her studying the silver dragon scale with such intensity that he no longer paid the slightest attention to her nearly exposed collar, the taut string in Chewer's chest suddenly loosened. Relief washed over her so strongly she almost went limp. Her earlier plans to resist evaporated. She had feared her innocence was lost, that she would be locked away and posed in 100 humiliating positions. Now it seemed that might not happen. Her modesty was probably safe. But another thought hit her immediately and sharpened her expression. Without the dragon scale, how could she alert her Lord Sister? No, she mustn't alert her. Lord Sister had warned her. This man appeared to be a legacy bearer of a god king, and his identity was extremely sensitive. She had been ordered to capture him before he could react. If this stranger learned of her Lord Sister's existence, her Lord Sister would be in danger. At that thought, Chiwor's gaze hardened. No matter what interrogation or torment came next, she would not reveal anything about her Lord Sister. At his side, Kong Ming'an examined the silver dragon scale in his hand with keen interest. He'd wrapped that hand in a trace of god-position origin energy from the Asura god ring. The scale still held the girl's body heat and a faint floral scent. The elemental rhythm under his fingers and the weak but intrinsically high-level power it contained excited him more than he'd expected. He had to admit the spiritual pivot, monitoring, and defense system he'd built was lacking against genuine divine rank interference. The three-eyed golden lion, the auspicious beast who could move in human form, had used the power attached to the silver scale to deceive the spiritual pivot and move through the Merchant Association's core as if it were an empty area. That worked only while the spiritual pivot ran automatically. When he intervened and performed global monitoring, the target became easy to spot. He could not directly see what the stealth hid, but the constantly shifting, unknown area that shielded it was conspicuous, like a black blot on white paper. When he activated his energy vision, he found the golden-haired, red-eyed girl crouched inside that shield. A quick identification confirmed the target, the three-eyed golden lion. He also noticed the silver-white dragon scale on her chest. For a moment, he'd been surprised. Miss Auspicious Beast should logically be sunning herself in the Stardew Great Forest, so why was she here? But now that she was, there was no reason to let her go. Using the god position origin power in the Asura god ring and the slowness domain, he constructed a dense, intrinsic confinement field, a domain of murderous intent. It was an absolute crushing force against a six-ring spirit emperor like Miss Auspicious Beast. It also interfered with and suppressed the silver dragon scale that traced back to the silver dragon king. Everything went according to plan, and the haul was more valuable than he dared hope. The prizes were many. First, Miss Auspicious Beast herself. As an auspicious beast that gathers the luck of the Stardew Great Forest, she was different from ordinary spirit beasts. In human form, she even possessed a golden dragon-like spirit, practically made for body cultivation, an extremely rare and valuable specimen. Then there was the golden dragon spear. Even setting aside everything else, the fact that its essence formed from a golden dragon king's rib made it a perfect blueprint for advancing the stagnating body cultivator path. It appeared to be a divine artifact in a weakened state, needing vast amounts of life force to recover, and it showed traits of demon-breaking and devouring life to feed itself. If analyzed and reproduced, future purges against evil soul masters would become far more efficient. And most important of all, the silver dragon scale now in his hand. Originating from the silver dragon king, it carried elemental power in its essence. Traced to its root, it linked back to the authority of the dragon god before the split. Its value was incalculable. Kong Ming'an lowered his gaze and toyed with the scale, savoring the faint, pure elemental origin it contained. After a long moment, he looked back at the immobile Miss Auspicious Beast and smiled, sincere on his face. "Thank you very much. This guy has been provoking me ever since." Chiwur glared fiercely. He'd stolen her golden spear, torn open her clothes, taken the dragon scale her lord sister had given her, pinned her in place, and now he was thanking her? Fury rose in her throat. She wanted to hiss and snap at him, but her body was restrained. All she could do was stare daggers at the wretched man. Kong Ming'an lifted an eyebrow, noticing something in her eyes that made him pause, a faint shadow of the Ice Empress. In the lab, Wang Donger slowly exhaled. Spirit power circulated and settled. She felt the abundant fluctuations within her, confirmed that her rank had just risen by one. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Being a personal assistant wasn't a glamorous title. It sounded like a ticket to menial things. But the level 3 authority of the spiritual pivot that came with the job and the right to purchase internal Merchant Association resources were concrete benefits. Thanks to that privilege, she'd been able to buy the Blue-Silver Series immortal herbs at a discount and weave them into her daily cultivation, something she'd never been able to do before. Misfortune and fortune rely on each other, I suppose, she murmured, feeling oddly conflicted. Her reverie was interrupted as the space ahead rippled. A familiar figure stepped out, Kong Ming'an. He saw her and offered a casual smile. Are you done cultivating? The casualness of it made Wang Donger freeze for a heartbeat. She hadn't expected him to appear so naturally. She recovered and nodded. I just finished. Kong Ming'an didn't linger to chat. He walked toward a workbench, right hand tucked casually behind his back. Only then did Wang Donger notice the dark red chain coiled in that hand, radiating a chilling, murderous aura. Before she could fully register it, the chain went taut. A figure bound mid-air by the dark links was awkwardly dragged out through the still-settling spatial ripples and pulled into the lab. It was a young girl, her figure graceful and oddly familiar to Wang Donger. When Wang saw the distinctive golden hair, the red eyes, the face she knew so well, her pupils tightened and she couldn't help calling out. Chuer? The Chuer before her looked far more mature than Wang remembered, at least 5 or 6 years older, and the rare heroic bearing she showed was far from ordinary. But she was in a disheveled state. Dark red chains bound her body in an intricate pattern, her ankles tied together, her wrists bound behind her back, the chains wrapped around her waist and then crossed and tightened above her chest. It was no simple tying. There was a deliberate, suggestive technique to it. Under the pressure of the metal, the girl's graceful curves were exaggerated, the contours around her chest forced into an awkward prominence that lent an oddly erotic air to the scene. This technique, it looked practiced. Wang Donger shot a suspicious look at Kong Ming'an, her eyes full of questions. Kong Ming'an casually raised a hand, using the chains to keep Chuer secured to the wall, and explained in an even tone, "Don't look at me like that. This friend of yours is a spy." A spy? Wang Donger stared at Chuer in shocked disbelief. Chuer herself was still restrained, unable to move. When Wang's gaze fell on her, Chuer's eyes slid away, shame and humiliation flushing across her face. Being discovered and brought here in such a degrading posture had clearly unsettled her. Wang Donger pressed her hand to her chest, took a step forward and demanded, "Can you explain? What exactly is going on?" Kong Ming'an glanced at her briefly and answered succinctly, "In short, your friend is a spirit beast in human form. She infiltrated the Chamber of Commerce with ulterior motives." He waved Chuer's small recording notebook in front of Donger. A spirit beast in human form, infiltrating the Chamber of Commerce? Wang blinked. The revelation that Chuer was a spirit beast stunned her even more than the claim that Chuer was a spy. Kong paused and looked back at Chuer, who glared at him with indignation. A slight smile touched his lips as he said, "Everything I said is correct, isn't it, Miss Auspicious Beast?" As he spoke, Chuer's head, which had been immobilized, suddenly became free to move. Instinctively, she tried to struggle, but the rest of her body remained like stone. Exhausted by the futility, she gave up and lifted her chin with a desperate, almost defiant expression. "Gah! Kill me!" Kong Ming'an shook his head, smiling. "That won't do." Chuer snorted. "I won't tell you anything." Kong nodded as if pleased by her spirit. Then, slowly, he raised a hand. Spirit power flowed, and a contract document of faint blue light, pure energy shaped into paper, materialized. He tapped it once with his fingertip, and a few concise clauses formed on its surface. The contract hovered in front of Chuer. She glanced at it twice, but before she could read the details, her right hand rose of its own accord. A trace of spirit energy and mental force was drawn from inside her, condensed into a golden mark that stamped itself precisely on the signature line. Forced signing? Where's the justice? Wang Donger watched, bewildered. Could a contract be signed against someone's will? Hadn't she signed contracts herself before? Kong Ming'an smiled more broadly and retrieved the glowing document as if completing a pleasant transaction. With the contract signed, we're now on the same side. So tell me, Miss Auspicious Beast, where did that Lord Silver Dragon King go? Chuer's first reflex was a cold snort. Then she turned her head away. How could I tell you about my lord's sister returning to the Star Do Great Forest? The lab fell silent. Chuer froze, suddenly realizing what she'd said. She looked at Kong in horror. Did I just... Kong Ming'an nodded, amusement in his voice. This is my latest development. I call it the common sense contract. operating on the spiritual and consciousness levels. One clause simply makes you subconsciously accept that it is natural to speak what's in your heart when I'm asking a question. That's why you blurted that out. You didn't let me read the contract. Chewer shot back automatically, cheeks tinged with red. Did I give you a chance to read it? Kong asked without irony. Chewer realized she'd spoken again and snapped her mouth shut, glaring furiously with her glassy red eyes. Her glare alone seemed like it could bind him. Ignoring Chewer's wrath for the moment, Kong Ming'an turned his attention to the spiritual pivot, the device that had already compiled information on both the Miss Auspicious Beast and the Miss Dragon King, who used the alias Gu Yue. He scanned the data quickly. Over 3 years of enrollment, excellent grades, a 6th-rank soul engineer, an invitation from Mingde Hall, and she'd already submitted an internship application to the Chamber of Commerce. The pattern felt familiar, and a speculative thought crossed his mind. Was this Miss Dragon King trying to take over a territory and then use the Chamber of Commerce's resources and network to exert influence across the Duluo continent? Kong couldn't help the faint chuckle that escaped him. My Chamber of Commerce is becoming a spirit pagoda, he muttered, half to himself. He examined the timeline. Miss Dragon King had taken a 1-month leave before the end of the last semester, citing family affairs, and because of her stellar record, the leave was approved. Counting from the holiday to the start of term plus that month, it totaled nearly 2 months. Enough time, he decided. A slight shift in the plot. Tomorrow would naturally bring out the Miss Dragon King's storyline. An idea tugged at him. Chewer and Donger could be written together into a scene where they both end up serving as maids. Donger, having stayed longer, would have resigned herself and wear it obediently. Chewer, proud and resistant, would struggle but ultimately be forced to comply, lifting her skirt in disdain, gritting her teeth with closed eyes, or watching Donger and the protagonist while biting back humiliation. It was one of those moments when the regular plot stalled, but the more lewd ideas he entertained, the more creative energy flowed. He couldn't help but think his imagination was a little warped. 175. Plastic Sisterhood Chewer, who had been standing nearby, frowned when she heard that. What are you planning to do to my master sister? She demanded. Kong Ming'an smiled faintly. Guess. Chewer snapped back without thinking. I'll guess your head. I won't let you hurt my master sister. Relax, Kong Ming'an drawled. I won't hurt her. I only want to discuss a business deal. He paused, then added casually, although it might be a little one-sided. Chewer bristled. If she hadn't still been bound, she would have lunged at him. He seemed unnaturally calm about Miss Auspicious Beast's hissing and fury. Kong Ming'an had lots of experience dealing with furious creatures. After all, he kept a little scorpion at home, so he merely watched her with amusement. All right, he said. First, you transform into your spirit beast form for me. Huh? This is part of the contract. You! Several hours passed in the laboratory. The golden-haired, red-eyed girl no longer wore the dark red chains, but she sat slumped on the sofa, limp as if her bones had been drained. She couldn't even lift a finger. There was no mystery to it. She had been forced to switch between beast form and human form over and over, hundreds of times. Even though transformation was an innate talent and didn't require massive spirit power per shift, the sheer frequency had exhausted her reserves. Kong Ming'an had simply exploited her ability and refused to let her rest. Chewer burned with resentment. Kong Ming'an, meanwhile, was contentedly sorting through the data he had gathered. Professional work needed a professional eye. Miss Auspicious Beast had exceptional raw talent for form switching. The method he had deduced on his own demanded a high threshold and certain cultivation requirements. But having captured a complete record of her transformation process, he had found a way to optimize it. The optimized method would lower the threshold considerably, allowing spirit beasts who had only reached the 10,000-year level to attempt transformation. With further refinement, 1,000-year spirit beasts might even be possible. Combined with the Enlightenment formation, the plan to get spirit beasts to take human form would advance smoothly. He'd also used the opportunity to study Miss Auspicious Beast's golden dragon martial soul for planned body cultivator enhancements. The project was basically on track, Other necessary information had been obtained. It was time to start making arrangements to welcome that Dragon King young miss. Kong Ming'an stood and turned to leave. After 2 steps, he paused and looked at Wang Donger, who had been watching in silence. During this period, you'll be responsible for guarding her and making sure she doesn't leave the lab, he said. Also handle trivial things, her 3 daily meals. Wang Donger blinked. Part of her felt awkward. Chuer had once been her friend. Standing guard over her felt wrong. Before she could talk herself into being lenient, Kong Ming'an added, I'll pay you an extra 10,000 contribution points a month if you watch her. No problem, right? At the mention of contribution points, Wang Donger's hesitation vanished. She quickly did the mental math. 10,000 points a month could seriously accelerate her cultivation. The reluctance evaporated, replaced by determination. Yes, President, I'll watch her closely, she said crisply. Kong Ming'an nodded, said nothing more, and walked out. The metal door slid shut. For a moment, the lab was quiet. Then Chuer, who had been half collapsed on the sofa, suddenly shot upright with a swish, moving with an agility that belied her exhaustion. She scanned the room with her senses flare. Only when she was sure he had really left did she exhale in relief. She walked to the door and pressed a fingertip to the smooth metal panel. Buzz. At her touch, a phantom image of a dark red longsword sprang into being, cold and murderous, the tip aimed precisely at the center of her brow. The killing intent was almost physical. The sight alone triggered the most primal fear of death. It was obvious. If she had tried to open the door, the sword would have pierced her through. Chuer jerked her hand away painfully. The sword vanished like a mirage, leaving only a faint metallic aftertaste in the air. She drew a long breath and tried to calm herself. Her expression was sour when she turned and saw Wang Donger nearby. Her eyes brightened with hope. Donger, can you get me out of here? She asked. Wang Donger hesitated, then looked at Chuer and ran through the facts. A transforming spirit beast, a spy hidden among humans, and memories of their clashes and the friendship that had grown at the academy. A flicker of sympathy surfaced, but was immediately stomped out by the thought of 10,000 contribution points every month. No, she said firmly. Chuer didn't hide her disappointment. Is there really no way at all? Wang Donger shook her head, but then, seeing how dejected Chuer looked, she softened a little. You don't have to worry too much. The president's methods aren't gentle, but he's not entirely inhuman. She forced a half smile. At least he didn't hurt your big father or second father, and he gave me an opportunity. Being his personal assistant feels risky, like I might get exposed or stripped bare at any moment, but so far, the treatment's been good. Chuer said nothing. Her real fear churned beneath the surface. Right now, she was praying for 2 mutually exclusive things. Either that Master Sister would return early and stop this man before he became fully prepared, or that Master Sister would not come back at all. After feeling that man's murderous aura close-up, she no longer felt certain Master Sister could just stroll in and solve everything. Still, she trusted Master Sister's wisdom. If she couldn't win, at least she could run. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. At the entrance to the administration building of the Sun Moon Royal Soul Engineer Academy, a black-haired, black-eyed girl walked out slowly. Her features were not spectacular, but together they made a delicately attractive face. Her black eyes were deep and composed, giving her a cool, aloof air that stood out against the campus bustle. Her figure was well-proportioned. The fitted black school uniform outlined the first hints of womanly curves, and her legs, sheathed in black stockings, were long and straight. She was the Silver Dragon King, using the alias Gu Yue. Having finished the leave cancellation procedures at the administration office, Gu Yu strolled calmly along the crowded boulevard toward the dormitories. Her return to the heart of the Stardo Great Forest was only partly to settle Spirit Beast tribal matters. The real purpose was to gather materials mestrapilmans. Spirit beasts found worthless but humans treasured. Spirit bones, rare metal ore, things the forest had accumulated over countless years. She meant to sell those items to the Merchant Association bit by bit, convert them into internal contribution points, raise her standing inside the association, and then exchange those points for rare knowledge and technology that couldn't be bought on the open market. As she had decided when she first came to the Sun Moon Empire, to conquer humanity, she had to first understand humanity. She reached the dorm she hadn't entered in months and pushed the door open. The room was immaculate, the floor spotless under the ceaseless sweep of the dust-clearing Soul Engineer formation, but Guyo's brows drew together immediately. Something was wrong. Cleanliness was expected, but this was almost antiseptic. The aura of Chur was barely perceptible. A dust-clearing formation could remove dirt, not erase a soul's presence. Chur's golden dragon martial soul, after her transformation, had always left a conspicuous trace to Guyue's senses. If the aura was this faint, it meant Chur hadn't been here for a very long time. Guyo felt her chest tighten. During the 2 months she'd been gone, she had monitored Chur through the dragon scale she'd left on her. Each previous report had been all clear. Now, that absolute absence of aura told her something was wrong. She concentrated and probed the dragon scale more carefully. This time, the feedback was different. The life aura at the other end had dwindled until it flickered like a candle in the wind, ready to be snuffed out at any moment. Her eyes hardened. The air around her seemed to freeze. She located the coordinates tied to the scale and, without hesitation, vanished in a ripple of silver space. Far to the north of the Sun Moon Empire, above a vast open sea, space suddenly warped. A figure stepped out of the distortion, the black-haired, black-eyed girl. The instant she appeared, a terrifying sweep of mental power washed over the waters, making the wind, the waves, and the countless sea spirit beasts below immediately fall within her perception. There was no sign of Chur. Guyo narrowed her eyes, puzzled, and then a point of extreme ice blue flared high in the sky, expanding in an instant. Boom! Heaven and sea were swallowed by a piercing white light, threaded with extreme cold and elemental annihilation. It wasn't warmth. It was light saturated with a ruthless, freezing force that pressed down like a tangible weight, flattening the sea beneath it. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stall. When the light faded, at its center hung a girl transformed. Silver hair, purple eyes, suspended in midair in a haze of elemental radiance. She was uninjured and steady. The silver dragon spear was in her hand, though Guyue had no memory of when the weapon had been seized. Crystalline silver-white dragon scales gleamed at the sides of her cheeks. There was solemnity in her expression. Divine rank. No doubt about it. Guyue's mind analyzed the strike in an instant. The attack used extreme ice as its core, drove the collision and annihilation of multiple basic elements, and concentrated all destructive force into a single point of explosion. The method was intricate, but not beyond replication given time. What made Guyo uneasy was the foundation behind the blow, a force on par with divine power, but without any trace of a power of faith aura. The assailant was unquestionably divine rank. Her old injuries still hadn't healed. She could not afford to unleash her full strength. And clashes between divine rank beings sent ripples that would draw the attention of the god realm. The opponent might not care about that, but Guyue couldn't risk becoming visible to the gods. If the god realm's divinities took notice of her, it would likely mean death. She lifted her eyes and saw another figure had appeared unnoticed in the air, a tall, white-haired, blue-eyed youth surrounded by 9 spirit rings. 3 of the rings were blood red, 6 ice blue, revolving like crystalline constellations, thick, gilded patterns traced across them. His aura was restrained but massive, like a mountain range felt through the chest. His presence was almost palpable. Before Guyue could react further, the white-haired youth turned into a beam of light, which split into 2 forms. One was a woman in white robes with an otherworldly cold aura. Guyue's instincts pegged her at once. The Lord of the Far North, the Snow Empress. But she was in a human body. Had she taken human form and returned to cultivation? Had she broken through to divine rank? Guyue's caution deepened. Beside the Snow Empress stood the other figure, an unremarkable black-haired, black-eyed youth whose aura was weak, not even up to title Duluo. Still, Guyue did not relax. The devastating strike had evidently been produced through spirit fusion between this youth and the Snow Empress. And from their posture during the fusion, it was obvious the human had dominated the merge. A mere human dominating a fusion with the Snow Empress? Guyue's assessment of the threat level spiked to the highest. The youth stepped forward. He raised a hand, and a destructive aura blossomed. not loud, but deadly, saturated with annihilation. A mark suffused with the gravitas of a god-king flickered into being before her, the god test of destruction. His gaze was calm as he spoke, his voice cutting through the sea wind to reach her ears. Your Majesty, Silver Dragon King, I speak to you now. Chapter 177, Miss Dragon King. There isn't a single good human being. Guyu's purple vertical pupils fixed on him, every muscle on guard. He knew who she was. The young man kept his tone steady. This is the god test of destruction. It has preset data. If my vital signs stop, or if you attack me, the data will be sent automatically. Once sent, it will pass through the god test and go straight to the god of destruction. Everything about you will be exposed to the god realm. He paused and stated the facts plainly. Of course, if that happens, I'll most likely be killed by your reaction before the data is delivered. But after my death, you will face the entire god realm turning its eyes on you, pursuit by one or more god kings without mercy. 30 seconds. Decide now. If you refuse to talk, I'll activate the test, send the information, and die with you. Silence fell between sea and sky, broken only by the wind. The Snow Empress took a half step back, ripples forming in the space behind her as if she stood ready to vanish. The young man, however, moved forward another step, closing the distance, and began to count down, voice cold and precise. 30, 29, 28. Each number was like a physical pressure squeezing her. Guyu ran through possibilities, trying to verify whether he spoke the truth. The aura about him had the unmistakable signature of the God King of Destruction, an impression she'd not forgotten after all the years. This was indeed the God test of destruction. A direct fight would be tremendously risky. He had divine rank power too. Even if he wasn't her equal, he could hold on long enough to trigger the device. If she fled, he could still send the data and she'd be hunted. Time narrowed her options. 17, 16, the countdown continued. Her face was grave, but the oncoming shadow of death fraying her composure. Finally, she cut him off, voice cold. Stop. He stopped, and a faint smile tugged at his mouth. He raised a hand, and a contract, simple in wording, forged from divine soul force, materialized and slid toward her. Guye looked it over. The terms were clear. Once signed, she could not attack Kong Ming'an or his affiliates without permission. He was bound by it as well. If she broke the contract, information about her would be instantly sent to the God of Destruction. If he broke it, the contract would obliterate him, and the information would not leak. On signing, he promised not to send anything about her to the God realm. It appeared to be a balanced contract enforced by threat. She read every clause, searching for loopholes. Then, 15. The young man resumed counting. Guyu's patience snapped. Why was he still counting? Shouldn't the timer have reset? The resumed countdown wrecked the careful weighing she'd been doing. Pressure closed in. After a beat, she stopped hesitating. She let a fingertip brush the pact, and a drop of silver blood, mixed with her divine force and mental energy, fell onto it. The contract flared, then split into two shafts of light. One shot into her body, the other didn't fly toward the man standing before her. It bypassed him and merged into the Snow Empress, who had been poised to step into the spatial ripple behind her. Guyue's heart lurched. In a blur of light, the Snow Empress's figure wavered, and another figure, identical to the young man who had been pressing her, stepped out from behind her. The Kong Ming'an, who had stood in front of her, melted away like an illusion. She stared. So the one who'd advanced and forced her step by step had been a decoy? His real self had been hidden with the Snow Empress, ready to escape the moment negotiations failed. He had never intended to die with her. Everything had been a lie. A hot spike of fury and humiliation rose in Guyu. How completely she'd been outmaneuvered. Kong Ming'an looked at the Silver Dragon King, a faint, amused smile on his lips. Nice to meet you for the first time, Your Excellency Silver Dragon King. His tone was formal with an easy undercurrent. He glanced at her brilliant purple eyes and chuckled softly. I'm Kong Ming'an, your future collaborator. Kong Family Chamber of Commerce, Underground Laboratory. Chuer lay curled on a soft cushion in a corner, glaring with red eyes at the uninvited guest on the sofa. The guest was a petite girl in a white and green dress, looking unexpectedly solemn, as if worrying about something. Chuer's good sister, Wang Donger, stood nearby, eyes bouncing between the two girls, helpless. Chuer felt depressed. The first month had been pleasant enough, confined to the lab but well-fed, with access to the Chamber of Commerce's internal Lingshu network. Lying flat online every day hadn't been boring, but the second month had been a trial. The hateful man who came to torment her almost daily forced her to activate her spirit, pushing her chi and blood to the limit. The silver lining was that in the process, he had remodeled her spirit rings. All 6 had become chi and blood soul rings, each at the 10,000-year level. Her power had jumped. She felt she could spar with a titled Duluo. The downside was brutal. Greater strength meant harsher tests. That man was merciless. His regimen crushed body and mind. Every trial drained her to the bone, leaving her too exhausted to lift a finger. Each time it ended, he simply carried her back and left her locked here again. What did he think she was? A toy to be played with and put away. She was furious but powerless. After a month, she knew she couldn't beat him, so she could only curse him in private. 178. Miss Dragon King was provoked. Chuer had been in a good mood all morning. That scoundrel had apparently been called away on something important and given her the day off. She had planned a nice, lazy rest until someone else showed up, froze her with a single look, and then, naturally, took her favorite sofa. Damn it, Chuer seethed inwardly, vowing that once she was strong enough, she would get her revenge, especially on that scoundrel. She was still muttering and scrawling curses in her head when the laboratory door clicked open. A few figures came in. Chuer looked up without thinking. The first person she saw was Kong Ming'an, the one who made her teeth itch with hatred, followed by a cold, unfamiliar woman, and then, her eyes suddenly brightened. As if saved, she sprang up from the cushion and rushed forward. "Big Sister Master!" Her voice bubbled with undisguised joy. Guyue glanced at the lively Chuer, whose bright demeanor suggested she'd suffered no mistreatment. Guyue's taut nerves loosened slightly, and she reached out to ruffle Chuer's hair gently. Kong Ming'an, standing a little to the side, smiled and said, "See, Miss Guyue, I didn't do anything to her." Guyue nodded but didn't answer him. Her attention went to the small woman who had risen from the sofa. Pure, intense, extreme ice aura radiated from the newcomer. After a quick appraisal, Guyue recognized her. The Ice Jade Empress Scorpion, the Ice Empress, one of the 3 great heavenly kings of the extreme north. She was here too? And by the look of things, she was aligned with this human youth, just as Snow Empress appeared to be. Guyue's expression grew heavier and more puzzled. This young man had not only gained Snow Empress's cooperation, the Snow Empress who had transformed to divine rank, but he also had the Ice Empress on his side? If so, it meant the extreme Northland stood behind him. How could humans and spirit beasts be so coexistent in the same room? Guyue fell quiet, thinking. The Ice Empress stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Kong Ming'an, eyes asking a question. Kong Ming'an inclined his head toward her and murmured, "It went smoothly." The Ice Empress relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders. Then she turned to appraise Guyue with a quiet, guarded scrutiny. Soon both sides had arranged themselves across from each other in the lab. On one side stood Kong Ming'an, flanked by the frosty Snow Empress and the alert Ice Empress, with Wang Donger slightly behind. Opposite them were Guyue and Chuer. Emboldened by her master's presence, Chuer stood straighter. The air thrummed with a thin edge of confrontation. Guyue broke the silence first, fixing Kong Ming'an with a steady gaze. "Tell me, what is it you want?" Kong Ming'an smiled. "It's simple. I want to establish cooperation with you, the Silver Dragon King, and with the Star-Dew Great Forest." Guyue's face stayed composed, but a cold sneer curled inside her. Outward deference had shifted to familiarity in an instant. His attitude changed with unnerving speed. "Humans and spirit beasts cooperating?" she said, her tone threaded with sarcasm. "On what basis?" Kong Ming'an said nothing at first. He merely raised his hand. The Asura God Ring appeared. The moment Guyue sensed it, her body reacted. If asked which God King in the God Realm had left her with the deepest scars, it would be the first-generation Asura God. Much of her prolonged recovery had been owed to the wound of that Asura divine force. Now she felt that same power again. Guyue rose and called forth her silver dragon spear, eyes wary. Kong Ming'an remained remarkably composed. He waved his hand, and the Asura god ring elongated and shifted, eventually taking the form of a sword, which he laid casually on the table. The Asura god sword. The name hit Guyue like a blow. The memory of past trauma sharpened her vigilance to a razor edge. His tone remained calm. The fact that after capturing Miss Auspicious Beast, I didn't report the information to the God Realm right away, and the fact that when I first acted, I didn't use the God Position's power to detonate the injuries on your body, those are my proofs of sincerity. Guyo found herself momentarily at a loss. She couldn't deny the point. She could sense the Asura god's pure power in him, faint but undeniably present. And combined with the recent god test of destruction, the implication of dual god-king positions was staggering. Could a human attain that? It made her take him more seriously. After all, if he truly intended to kill her, there would be God Realm pursuers at their heels now. She wouldn't be sitting here negotiating. Kong Ming'an continued. Personally, I don't want enmity with spirit beasts. I don't want pointless wars. If conflict breaks out, it will cost both sides dearly. Compared to endless fighting, coexistence, trade, and mutual progress is the path that benefits everyone. The conflict between humans and spirit beasts isn't inherently irreconcilable. He looked frank. Guyue's gaze flicked again to Snow Empress and Ice Empress. Snow Empress's presence here suggested the stance of the extreme north land. If the extreme north was willing to sit at the table, his words suddenly seemed far more credible. Guyo stayed silent, weighing things. Kong Ming'an then pushed another document across the table. Guyue took it and felt only plain paper, no residual power. She glanced at him. It's a draft cooperation agreement. Read it. If the terms are acceptable, we can discuss a formal signing, Kong Ming'an said. Guyo read. The draft was short. At its core, it proposed a strategic partnership between the Stardew Great Forest and the Merchant Association. Core members of the Stardew Great Forest would gain access to the contribution point system and parts of the association's knowledge base and technical services. In return, the Stardew Great Forest would provide samples, blood, spirit power, mental force, from certain high-level spirit beasts and cooperate in non-lethal research and experiments. The draft even listed specific names for cooperation: Ditian, BG, Xiangjun, Wan Yao King, and herself. The youth's objective was blunt and clear. He aimed squarely at the heart of the Stardew Great Forest, trying to draw them all into a single pact. Guyue stared at the clauses, brows drawing together. If the other side truly kept its word and implemented the contract as written, this cooperation would bring real benefits to the Stardew Great Forest. She had seen for herself what the Merchant Association could offer: knowledge, technology, and the contribution point exchanges that could be a huge help to the spirit beast race. But the cost was steep. Allowing spirit beasts to participate in the other party's experiments carried serious risks. She weighed the pros and cons in silence. Kong Ming'an watched her without hurry. Ever since the initial signature, the other side had been completely within his control. That opening thunderstrike had not only tested the Snow Empress's limits, it had been a demonstration, proof that his side possessed divine rank power, a show intended to force Guyue to choose between risking attention from the God Realm or standing down. The God Test of Destruction created a deterrent, the non-aggression pact, a preliminary safety baseline, and the illusion of mutual constraint. Of course, that balance existed only from Guyue's point of view. Behind the scenes, Kong Ming'an had already confirmed the young Miss Dragon King's situation through Chuer and contacted the God of Destruction via the God Test of Destruction. The response he got was straightforward and reassuring. There is no need to worry. In the lower realm, no matter how much the Silver Dragon King recovers, she will at most reach first-rank deity. She cannot cause much trouble. Since you want her, I will leave her to your disposal. If you cannot handle it, call me. That kind of backing felt like a safety net to Kong Ming'an, like having a mentor summon an even greater mentor in the nick of time. A God King's power dwarfed almost everything in the lower realm. In the God of Destruction's eyes, the young Miss Dragon King was no threat, certainly less dangerous than the Golden Dragon King. Bolstered by that certainty, Kong Ming'an was willing to press the plan forward. Young Miss Guyo can take her time considering it, he said at last, smiling as he rose. If you find cooperation feasible, we will move forward together. If not, you may leave the Sun Moon Empire. I guarantee by contract that from then on the Merchant Association and the Stardew Great Forest will remain separate and uninvolved. Guyue looked up at him. A moment ago he had been calling her Her Excellency the Silver Dragon King. Now he was young Miss Guyue. She felt an odd prick of annoyance. Kong Ming'an ignored that flicker and spoke evenly. You may continue your studies. The contribution point system will remain open to you. I only ask for a definitive answer before the next semester begins. He said no more and turned to leave. The Snow Empress rose with him. The Ice Empress leapt off the sofa and followed quickly. Wang Donger hesitated a moment, then hurried after them too. As they walked away, Guyue heard the question escape her. Why? Kong Ming'an paused, but didn't look back. He knew the question was meant for the Snow Empress, not him. Guyue fixed the Snow Empress with a hard gaze. You're a spirit beast, the monarch of the extreme North Land. Why do you trust him? Why choose to stand behind a human? The Snow Empress was composed, prepared to answer. The Ice Empress, however, had no patience left. She snarled first. A mere human? If we don't stand with him, should we stand with you, or with your so-called beast co-ruler? Her voice was sharp with contempt as she turned on Guyue. Beast co-ruler? What kind of co-ruler are you? Where were you when the Snow Empress's origin was damaged? Where were you when she couldn't condense her soul core and suffered blow after blow? Where were you when I was mauled by the heavenly tribulation and knew I would die in the 400,000-year catastrophe? Did you, this high and mighty beast co-ruler, ever lift a finger to help the extreme North Land? And now you ask us to stand with you. On what basis? Your empty words, we spirit beasts? The volley of accusations hit Guyue like a physical blow. She opened her mouth and found no answer. She stood frozen, words failing her. Kong Ming'an arched a brow, mildly surprised. When the Ice Empress scolded him, it had usually been in a teasing, gentle way. Why was she so vicious now? The Snow Empress watched her sister, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth at Binger's ferocity. She swallowed it quickly, turned back to Guyue, and answered evenly. Everything of mine already belongs to him. Why wouldn't I trust him? Without lingering, she reached out and took Kong Ming'an's hand. The two left side by side. The Ice Empress shot Guyue one last cold glance, snorted and followed. Within moments they were gone. Silence fell over the room. Only Guyue and Kuor remained. Guyue stood motionless for a long time, the Ice Empress's words still ringing in her ears. The Snow Empress's confession, that she had entrusted everything to Kong Ming'an, reverberated behind it, leaving her thoughts a chaotic whirl. Chuer stepped closer, worry written all over her face. Lord Sister, are you all right? Guyue blinked and slowly regained her composure. She shook her head once, forcing a calm that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a few heartbeats she hesitated, then hardened with resolve. Chuer, stay here and keep an eye on him for me. I need to return to the Stardew Great Forest one more time. Chuer froze. Ah? Keep an eye on him? Are you? Will I get eaten alive by that man in a single bite? Panic flitted across Chuer's features as she tried to form a protest. Before she could speak, a silver light wrapped around Guyue and her figure dissolved into the air, leaving only faint ripples in space. Left alone in the empty room, Chuer's clear eyes turned to bewilderment and then to alarm. Lord Sister, why did you go without me? Take me with you, she cried. And in the sudden silence, a thought thundered, unbidden and fierce. Guyue, would you let the spirit beast race be annihilated on your watch? 180, Snow Empress, shall we test me now? Deep beneath the Kong family chamber of commerce, on level -201, lay Kong Ming'an's private resting quarters, a cluster of rooms forming a quiet, secure space accessible only to a very few with advanced spiritual pivot authority. Wang Donger had already politely excused herself. Only Kong Ming'an, the Snow Empress, and the Ice Empress, who walked a half step behind, remained. The Snow Empress's hand was still lightly intertwined with Kong Ming'an's, a relaxed posture that had become almost habitual. The Ice Empress watched their joined hands, pursing her lips. Her expression was complicated. Her golden eyes drifted off for a moment, lost in thought, until a soft, peaceful voice sounded at her ear. Thank you, Ice Empress, for speaking up for me this time. The Ice Empress stiffened and lifted her eyes. The young man ahead had somehow turned around and was looking at her with a faint smile. She blinked, turned her head away, crossed her arms, and said stiffly, "Who helped you speak?" He paused, then added softly, "I was only stating the facts." Ming'an nodded. Understood. Still, thank you, Ice Empress." The Ice Empress snorted an ambiguous little sound and kept silent, though the corners of her mouth curved ever so slightly. The Snow Empress watched her reaction, shook her head, and steered the conversation back to business at the right moment. "What are your plans next?" "I just need to wait and proceed carefully," Ming'an replied. The spirit beast forces across the Duluo plain that required his attention could be roughly divided into two categories: land and sea. The land forces included the Stardo Great Forest, the Extreme Northland, and the Evil Demon Forest. He divided them by the number of top-tier combatants each force contained. With the Snow Empress and the Ice Empress present, the Extreme Northland was basically family. No worries there. The Stardew Great Forest was still up for recruitment. Barring accidents, cooperation was highly likely, and if cooperation could be achieved, he was confident he could poach everyone. When it came to poaching, he considered himself a professional. He chuckled inwardly, imagining the Dragon King, young Miss, becoming a commander without troops and utterly helpless. The Evil Demon Forest was already on his cleanup list. The Holy Spirit cult's headquarters were there, and the Evil Emperor himself was excellent material. Once his spiritual pivot upgrade was complete, the Evil Demon Forest would be his first target. The sea, however, was the largest and most complex matter, and that depended on Wangdonger's development. Countless sea spirit beasts worshipped the sea god, and Wangdonger, with her sea god martial soul, would have a massive advantage in handling oceanic spirit beast affairs once her strength was sufficient. Don't ask why this new sea god was a little different from the sea god you worshipped. Just accept it. This was the sea god. With those arrangements, the spirit beast situation on the Dulo plain was essentially set, and human affairs would be handled at the same time. The Sun Moon Empire's strength was unprecedented. After mass-producing 100 refined metal a few months ago, the Empire was in the midst of a small technological revolution. Once he figured out how to mass-produce 1,000 refined metal, spirit tools would change even more dramatically. Technological innovation would produce a leap in military strength. Even now, the Sun Moon Army, early in its revolutionary phase, already held a crushing advantage over the Duluo Three Kingdoms. The only difference was the cost of victory. Because of that, the Empire's high officials had started thinking differently. More of them considered how to win with lower cost rather than rushing into war. But when external conflicts quieted, internal conflicts tended to rise. Before he could unify the Duluo plain, he needed to purge the Sun Moon Empire from within. The first step, cleansing the evil soul masters, that wouldn't take very long. A short while later, the trio sat in the lounge of the resting quarters. Ming'an turned to the Ice Empress. "How's the progress on the star ring?" "I'm preparing to begin condensing the third star ring," she replied. Ming'an nodded. The Snow Empress had already condensed her godhead. Her combat power was stable at divine rank, so she no longer required ordinary resources. Elder Yi, having obtained knowledge related to constructing a god position at God King rank, had secluded himself deep within the undead demiplane. He would likely step into the divine rank when he emerged. Kong Deming, after researching the fusion of spirit and spirit tool and receiving feedback, had reached the 99th rank limit Duluo, but his current interest lay mostly in mecha research. Since the body cultivator and artifact cultivator systems weren't yet fully mature, a breakthrough would be difficult in the short term. Given those circumstances, the Ice Empress would become the focus of current resource support. "Prepare yourself," Ming'an said. "After a while, I'll help you accelerate the shaping of your godhead." The Ice Empress nodded. They had agreed on this before. At that time, the two of them would enter secluded cultivation together. Only the two of them. She mulled that over silently. When the topic wound down, the Snow Empress spoke up. Her tone was calm as always, but her words were pointed. "My divine soul power transformation is complete. The state between the star ring and the godhead is stable now. Are you going to test me?" The Ice Empress paused. A strange sense of unease washed through her. Before, she probably wouldn't have cared, but ever since she had seen those scenes beyond the ice wall, it was as if a door to a new world had opened for her. Was this test even appropriate? She glanced at Kong Ming'an. He met the Snow Empress's gaze, blinked, and nodded. Sure. As those words fell, the distance between them closed a little. Kong Ming'an shut his eyes and, as naturally as breathing, pressed his forehead to the Snow Empress's. A clear mental fluctuation rippled outward as he began to examine her condition carefully. The Snow Empress remained expressionless, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Kong Ming'an without blinking. They were so close their lips would meet if either of them leaned forward just slightly. The Ice Empress. This doesn't look like a test at all. Are they really not going to kiss? She felt unaccountably uneasy. Forcibly turning her head away, she refused to watch the scene that disturbed her peace. But she couldn't help herself. Curiosity and a strange anticipation made her peek back. She watched them a moment, then a bitter, restless feeling rose in her chest, and she turned away again, only to be drawn back once more. The cycle repeated. Look away, peek, bitterness, anticipation, repeat. Kong Ming'an inwardly smiled. One more teasing episode directed at the Ice Empress, and he could thoroughly harass her. After that, it would be time to start teasing Chuar and Donger as well. Ha!